Hi everyone, welcome to lecture 10. Can't believe it's getting to this point of semester already. Okay, what we are doing today, we are looking at what is evaluation, some simple steps that we go through in evaluation, and the difference between evaluation and assessment. We're looking at reflective practice and how we put it into our actions that we're doing within a classroom, and the result and consequences of using some action research in your classroom. So let's go back to our teaching and learning cycle that we have. So this is what we've seen and used before. So we've got this whole idea that ongoing evaluation happens because essentially we want to work out what do we want our students to learn, how we're going to get them there, how do I know when my students are there, and where are my students now. Now we need to think about all of the other elements that we add in. So what I already know about development, so that helps me to determine what I want my students to learn. I then need to think about how am I going to document all of that? So am I using my Notre Dame documentation? Am I using my childcare centre documentation? When I'm a teacher in a classroom or in a centre, what type of documents do I need to use then? I need to think, and this is where you all did a fabulous job explaining it in your curriculum approaches when you wrote your philosophies. Think about what is your curriculum that you will be using, because when we're working with young children, we don't have a curriculum that's set from SCASA, but we've had different curriculum approaches that become part of our philosophy. So when we think about what we're doing in the classroom, what's pedagogical strategies are we going to use? What groupings are we going to have of our children? You might be in a school that advocates for streaming. You might be in a school that advocates for multi-age grouping. So think about what are the strategies that you will have. So then you get to the real crux of it where you go, right, what and how am I going to be assessing? What is that going to look like when I'm going through this process in a classroom? And then how am I going to document all my assessing? We've spoken before about how you need to make sure that you can access all of that easily and simply, because there's no use collecting a whole lot of data if you can't access it. And think about all of this information. So what's it telling me? Is it actually useful? And then do I need to think about how I tell parents about all of this? Do I have an obligation to inform parents, or is it something that is more focused on what I'm doing in my teaching in the classroom that is not something that needs to be informed and so on and shared? Oftentimes I find the more you can tell parents, the less hassles they give you. All right. So all of that forms evaluation. Evaluation is not just evaluation of the children, it's evaluation of the entire planning, teaching, and assessing process that you use within your classroom. So let's have a think about the real impact of that. When we're thinking about assessment and we're thinking about evaluation and we're thinking about planning, we have to have the children at the core of whatever we are planning for. So we always keep in mind those beautiful little beings who are sitting in front of us, and we think, right, our early years learning framework, it says that we need to make sure that we give children agency. It says we need to make sure that we take into account all of their needs and interests. So we keep them at the forefront of anything that we are doing. So let's define evaluation. So it means that we're ascertaining the value or amount to appraise something carefully. Okay, so it means we have to take into account more than just the face value of something. So through analysing, we review the meaningfulness of something based on our values and understandings. We make judgments about what has happened and why, and what we believe should happen next. That's taken from your text. So when we think about evaluation, we can't do true evaluation if we don't add in this idea of reflection, because assessment is collecting one level of data, particularly focused on child-centered data. Evaluation is taking that data together with all the other things and looking at what's going on in our classroom so that we can make adjustments. We have to involve reflection, and that can be a huge amount of self-reflection, and it can also be reflection that's done hand in hand with other people and other formats as well. So what are we actually evaluating and reflecting upon when we go through this process? So some of the things are, we're looking at your personal skills. So I'm looking at my skills, my teaching skills, my pedagogy, and so on. I'm looking at what I'm doing. Is it truly reflective of my personal philosophy? Am I living out my philosophy in the work that I'm doing in my classroom? Am I really reflecting on what I want to see happening in a classroom and what I'm actually bringing into the classroom or into my centre? And sometimes when I'm working with experienced teachers, they start to realize that their personal philosophy and the school's philosophy are not blending in nicely. And that's where sometimes we can have really great discussions with leadership teams about how to create a better environment that suits the school and the personal philosophy of different teachers. We're reflecting and we're evaluating the content that we are actually teaching. So we're looking at what and why are we teaching certain things in our rooms. We're reflecting and we're evaluating on the strategies that we're using and the resources that we're using. So simple things. A lot of times I find that some early childhood rooms use a lot of consumables. We use a lot of paper, we use a lot of cardboard, we use a lot of plastic, and it really is disposed of. It's used for a very short period of time and then it's sent home or it's thrown away or it's not even recycled. So we have to be very critical about the things that we use. I'm finding more and more centres are investing less money in those consumables and they're looking at how they can reuse things. So go through that process of evaluating and reflecting. There's nothing worse than walking up to schools in the last week of school and seeing a giant skip bin out the front filled with old things, filled with children's work, filled with things that are just disposed of. So let's think about what we're doing in our classrooms from the beginning. So we want to reflect on the way we set up our actual learning environment. So the physical environment that we have together with the emotional and the social environment that we're setting up. So we want to think about how we organise our room. I was talking with a principal last weekend and she was saying that it's amazing in one of her early childhood rooms that she said every week she can walk in and she can see something has changed, and by the time it's 3 or 4 weeks have gone by, the entire room has changed. So that teacher is constantly reflecting on what she's doing and why she's setting it up, so that then it becomes the most effective environment possible for the children that she's working with. This is one that I have to constantly keep at forefront. We have to reflect on our behaviour management. Our attitudes, beliefs, and actions influence everything that happens with the children around us. So if we're having a bad day, you can pretty well guarantee the children are going to have a bad day as well. And sometimes they make us have a bad day, and sometimes our mood is reflected back at us by the children's behaviour. So we always have to be reflecting on what we're doing and how we're interacting with the entire class, with individuals, and with small groups. This is one that a lot of schools are constantly doing. They're reflecting on the documentation methods. So why we are writing things down, where we are putting them, how we're making sure they go up to sector or how they go through Seesaw, whatever is the process that your school is using or that your centre is using. I find there's lots of reflection that's happening about that all the time. We want to make sure that we're reflecting and evaluating the ethical practices that we have, and that could be the way we're interacting with people. It could be, as I said, the recycling of materials. It could be our gardens that we're using. Just all of those things that you want to share and work with children really in the best way possible. But we need to reflect on our own practices because sometimes things just happen and we're not sure why they happen, and we need to be asking questions about why they're going on. This is one that I would like a lot more centres and schools to do, and that is to really reflect on the good partnerships with families they want to develop. Some schools have amazing partnerships. Other schools and teachers are very dismissive of the role of families. And in early childhood, it's imperative that you work hand in hand with your parents and your caregivers, because they are the people that will help you to create amazing experiences, or they'll be the ones that will make your life awful. And you may want to reflect on how you are using action research, or what efforts you're putting in to develop good professional learning and to attend relevant professional development that you may be interested in, and so on. So that's what we want to think about, what we could evaluate and reflect upon. So my core things that I want you to think about as a beginning teacher are: how well am I teaching? So what am I doing really well when I'm interacting with the children? So think about that as you go out and do your lessons in the next few weeks. How well am I actually interacting? How well am I communicating the key ideas and my core teaching that I want them to understand? So what are the really good things that I'm doing? Because we always want to do more of the good and less of the bad. And then on the converse, what aspects do I need to improve? Do I need to keep the children focused a little bit more? Do I need to change my language to make it more suitable for the age group? What are the aspects that I need to improve? And remember, what are the things that are good? We want to do more of those. So a reflective practice, it's not something that we should consider to be, I'll get to that later, but it should be something that happens at a regular time. So it offers us advice about our past practice. So we want to go through this idea of reflecting on the past, but we also then want to use it to give us some good directions for our future. Because otherwise, why are we doing this reflective process? I consider doing good evaluation is like doing good research. We're finding out what's already gone on and we're looking at where we want to go to next. Because essentially what you're doing is you're identifying the right questions that you want to ask and you're working out how to answer them. So if you're having major behaviour management problems in your classroom, there's no use just going to the principal and saying, I need some more help. You need to do some reflective practice and go, I'm finding it difficult to work with this child. I'm not sure what I should do. I've tried this and this and this. This has worked. This hasn't worked. I think this is doing well. Can I have someone help me to do some more reflection on what's going on? Rather than just saying, I can't deal with these kids, because that's not going to win you friends. So why do we actually go through this process of reflective practice on very regular basis? The first one is we need to think about what is our reason or our purpose. So we need to have a reason that we are going through this evaluative process. So something's led us to that point. So could it be that we want to investigate the content that we're using and we want to make sure that we are doing the best thing possible for the age group that we're working with? And we need to think, is this going to be something that would be for us just as educators? Is it something that your leadership team wants you to investigate? Is it something that parents have identified as an issue that they consider? So is it going to be for a particular reason that you have it? Now, when we evaluate, we need to have a degree of accountability. We can't just keep doing everything that we do all the way, the same way, all the time, because that's not going to allow us to grow. A good reflective teacher is someone that's constantly changing and growing. And I know working in my field with technology, it's constantly changing. And so some teachers I find can take on board new technology. They're not very technological, but they'll take it on board because they're constantly in this reflective practice. And they have this idea that they must be accountable for everything that they're doing. Which leads into that third one of why do we go through this very much a personal need to grow and develop. I do encounter lots of teachers who possibly have taught in year one for 25 years or 35 years even, and they're doing very similar things, but they're not the norm. Most people have a great need for personal growth and development. We want to make sure that we're doing the best that we can. It's quite an innate human quality that we do want to grow, and we do want to make sure that we have the best interests of the children at heart, No teacher says, I want to be a terrible teacher. They all say, I want to be the best teacher that I can. Sometimes people do that in the best ways possible, and other people find it difficult. So when we go through this process, we want to make sure that we're helping everyone. So what does it help us to do when we go through this as educators? First of all, it helps us to respond thoughtfully and with integrity to all of those different situations and challenges that happen as a teacher. It helps us to make good decisions. If we are reflecting, we don't just react, we actually make an informed decision. And there's a big difference between reacting to something and carefully choosing our actions after something has happened. We can then go through this process where we implement and evaluate our changes. So we make sure that we're putting in place the best things possible to put the right policies, the right practices, and the right pedagogies in our centres and our classrooms. And if we're doing good reflective practice, we're accountable to our families, our colleagues, and our communities, and we can explain why and what we're doing and how we're going about it. And finally, of course, what we want to do is improve our learning experiences and our outcomes for all of the children. We want to make sure that we're doing that in the best way possible. So how can we go about this? I find it really boils down to these key things. First of all, we have to do some self-monitoring, and that can be a bit tricky. And the self-monitoring, it can be just you think at the beginning of a session, this is what I want to really focus on, this and this and this. And you might outline one or two things for yourself. So you think, right, these are my things. I then find that using some audio or some video recordings are really useful. There's cameras you can get that go around your neck and they track you as you're moving around a room. Brilliant for doing things where you want to work out how are you moving around the room? How are you speaking to individuals? How much time are you spending? I was chatting with a teacher over the weekend and she said she found some older video recordings of a classroom that she was working in a couple of years ago, and she had a special needs child in there who was very, very taxing and very draining and extraordinarily huge demands that he placed on the teacher. And she looked at one lesson and she realized while she was watching that lesson that she had spent 86% of her time dealing with that child over that hour. So those sorts of things, they're really useful if you want to go and talk to leadership to say, I'm having difficulties. Can I please get a little bit more support? This is what's going on in my room. Because sometimes people aren't aware. So having that idea that you're doing proper reflective practice and you've got some evidence to back you up makes life much easier. I find asking students, so do some little questionnaires, find out, are they enjoying class? Do they like having those little spaces that you've created for them? The questionnaires are depending on what age group you have. You can do written questionnaires if you had, say, year ones and above. When you're working with pre-kindies, kindies or pre-primaries, you might do some little verbal questionnaires and so on. You might do them at the beginning of the year. You might reevaluate at the end of the first semester. And then at the end of the year, what are the things that they enjoyed the most? It's always quite surprising. The things that you might spend ages organising and doing become a blip for them. And then those weird little things, they just love them. Sometimes it's the things like they loved their water play. They loved the sandpit. They loved it when you would bring jugs of water out and pour it into the sandpit. And you're like, oh, wow, okay. Instead, you then invested $15,000 getting this amazing water play garden. And it's like, yeah, all they wanted was jugs of water in the sandpit. So do some interviews. And the interviews could be with children, but it could also be sometimes with their parents as well. Now, obviously, when you are working with older children, you've got the student test results. So NAPLAN can be a great little enabler for you to see some data, as well as any of your criterion referenced or your norm referenced standardized tests of any sort that you may do. They provide some really good baseline data for you. The on-entry testing, that can provide some excellent data for you as well, but you have to use it. And then some schools have set up these great mentoring and coaching processes that happen. Other schools, it's not part of their culture yet, but I find that it's growing more and more in our education system. So you might have outside observers. They could be people that you nominate to come in. It could be a peer, it could be a mentor, it could be someone from the leadership team. Some schools have their little drop-ins that they do, their little check-ins that happen every 2 weeks and so on, where they just sit, leadership team, come and sit in your classroom for half an hour, and you say to them, can you help me focus on my questioning techniques? Can you help me focus on how I work with that child? Can you help me focus on, the recording that I'm doing for this assessment and so on? So all of that becomes part of your ongoing reflection in some way. So when we think about what we're doing, we want to go through and not just collect the data about it, but we actually want to go through this idea where we analyze it and then we put it into action. So the first thing we've got to do is to identify the patterns. So it could be that you always have difficulties on the Thursday morning, and that's because the children go to sport first and then come in. And you notice that those 4 kids who are your tricky little children anyway, they don't settle. So look at those patterns. You can only do that if you start to identify them. And it could be that you then say, okay, can I swap my dot around? Because it's not working. I need to do that after they have morning tea, because obviously they're not coping with sport and then trying to settle into our literacy time. So identify the patterns and the commonalities and the things that can be changed. And then once you've identified it, you can make some recommendations and potentially plan for some improvement. So as a pre-service teacher, you want to think about these types of evaluation questions. So think things through. Was the integration of the topic or the concept meaningful? Was the amount I planned too much, too little? Did they achieve the objectives? Were my teaching strategies effective? What were the types of groupings that I used? Did I cater for all the diverse needs of children in my class? Did I make use of appropriate resources? Did my use of assessment indicate the knowledge and skills? What could be improved? All of those things you want to go through as you're starting to do your lesson plans or your forward planning documents, because most of you are heading out to your school experience 3 next year, which means that you'll be doing forward planning documents that are over a period of time rather than just a lesson that is a one-off. So what we want to do is help you to build and to always consider a good cycle of self-reflection. So how do you go through this idea of you reflect, you reevaluate what's going on, and then you go through a renewal process? And it could be the renewal is not a drastic change, just little tweaks. But those constant little tweaks, like I said about that teacher who changes one thing every week or so in her room, by the time you've gone through 5 weeks, you've changed most of your room around. It's those constant little reevaluations and then renewals that go on. Now, if we're going to go through our self-reflection, then something that you may find useful is to go through an action research process. So what happens there is that we actually are, standard research is quite detached, whereas action research, you are doing the research while you are putting in place something and you are looking at the data that's happening. So it's called evidence-based or data-driven. And it's quite a systematic approach to reviewing what's going on already in your practice. It's not about having somebody just observe you. It's actually about putting things into practice in different ways. So generally it's focused on your situation, and it is quite focused on individuals and what they want to do. Now, it's designed to improve your teaching and to improve your learning in specified areas, not that somebody else is looking at, but that you want to look at. So what are the steps involved? So you identify a topic, you conduct a literature review, so you find out what other people have done, you work out a way of gathering your data and your evidence, and you look for opportunities to improve your performance. So it's very much based on what you're doing in the classroom. So what are some things that you could do some action research on? And sometimes this happens at a specific classroom level, but it could also be done across a school or across a particular group of year levels like the early years. So one of the things that I've seen a school do is they were reviewing a new reading program. So what they did, they had a couple of different year one teachers, and the two year one teachers each used a different reading program for a period of time, and they set up some research questions for it, and they worked out which one was going to be the most appropriate, and then that was the one that they then went through the whole review process on, and then both year one teachers implemented it. I've been at another school where what they did was they wanted to look at how they could use numeracy groups in a different way, and they wanted to use not just standard rotations, because standard rotations are not an effective mode, but they wanted to make sure that they had proper collaborative groups. So they looked at the way that they could set them up with homogeneous or heterogeneous grouping types, and obviously based on different ability levels or mixed ability levels. So they were looking at how they set that up, and they did it in a number of different ways and then evaluated them, so that then when they started the next semester, they had a clear-cut approach for doing it. And the other one that I was at a school, and their NAPLAN data showed that across the school, their spelling was not at the same level as their reading and their writing. So they wanted to look at what they could do with their spelling. So they investigated and went through this collaborative approach of working out how to change their spelling processes that they used. They investigated different textbooks that they could incorporate. They invested as a school in some professional learning, and they went through that idea of how you actually change something to best suit the needs of the teachers and the children in your school. Now, why is this all so important? One is that when we are looking at things like our EITSL, this idea of evaluation and reflection, it is a professional requirement that we have. So you can have a little look at your EITSL standards, and you could see some of the tools and resources that are based around this idea of how we go through this planning, teaching, assessing, evaluating, and reflection process. Now, when it comes to what you are doing in schools, so with your prac, most of you are in second year, and you had coronavirus invade our prac, and so we didn't end up doing a standard prac. Next year, when you go out on your prac, you do what's called, you used to do what's called your Teaching Methods 2. And Teaching Methods 2 is completed during your school experience. And essentially what you need to do is you would have a few students to observe. You would then teach the way that you would be planning for as part of your forward planning document. You would then have a number of elements that you had to reflect on. Well, you had to assess the students as after that you've taught it. You then reflect on it, and you would write up an essay about it and so on afterwards. And it would be marked by the Notre Dame tutors. We now have what's called your GTPA, the Graduate Teaching Professional Assessment, and it's completed during and after your internship. It's submitted after your final prac, and it's marked externally. Now, it has a bit of a kicker that you must pass that to be able to register with the Teacher Registration Board, which means that you could pass your prac, fail your GTPA, and not graduate. Not be able to teach. You'll graduate from university, but you wouldn't be given your teacher registration. So what's required for your GTPA? You have to plan, teach, and assess, and reflect and evaluate. You have 3 focus students, someone from the middle, someone who is achieving really well, and someone that's struggling a little. You need to show some clear evidence of your planning, your reflection, and your analysis of the student work. You have to provide some explanations of why and how you created that planning and the adjustments that you completed as part of your reflection. And you put in there your forward planning documents, your assessment, your work samples, and a clarifying essay. All of those are submitted to the external markers in some format. And that has started this year for the first year. So they're in the middle of doing that at the moment. Now, what about in your assignment? So in your final assignment, the biggie, we want to see some reflective elements. So we want to see that you're discussing the progress of the students in the group that you're working with. We want your lessons and how they were modified to be part of that reflection process. And we then want a final reflection about the entire process that you've gone through. I will give you all of those details, and there'll be some guiding questions for you that will all be available in the next week or so, along with a full rubric, just like we've done for the others as well. Lee and I are just finalizing all of that and going through the process with the uni as well. All right. Now, let's review what we've gone through. So our evaluation, it's not just assessment. Evaluation is much broader, and it includes assessment and reflection when we're looking at it as an early years teacher. Reflection is an essential element of our plan, teach, assess cycle. So we're reflecting on every element within there. We're reflecting on our planning, we're reflecting on our teaching, we're reflecting on our assessment, and all of that forms the evaluation. Now, if we want to go through and become a better teacher, we might want to look at things like action research, and those action research processes can help us to refine our practice. And finally, your teaching method 2 and your GTPA, they both use your reflective process that we've just been talking about. So we want you to keep that in mind, that this idea of reflection is not a one-off. It's part of how we want you to think about planning and teaching. Now, tutorials for weeks 10 and 11. So Lee and I had a great conversation in the last few days, and we've decided that we wanted to give you some more time for planning. Now, what we're going to do is have no contact tutorials for this week of week 10. And so that means that you've got that extra couple of hours to do some planning. Our suggestions are that you jump online with one another, that you get together at uni in between if need be. I know on my Monday, people, it's particularly difficult, so I thought that would be easier for you than coming into uni. However, I will be at uni if you do want to meet up with me in any way. Now, in week 11, my group, we are on site on week 11. So we will be on site doing our final planning and review of our school-based lessons. Lesson plans for lessons 2 and 3, I'd like due by the Sunday evening before we head out to the school. And week 11, for Lee's group, you are going to school on week 11. So you will be at Our Lady of Mount Carmel in Hilton by 1:30, ready for, I think it's a 1:50 or so start. So you've got to work out who's collecting or returning the equipment. Lee and I will have a shared document. So my group will be using it in the class. We'll put it all on charge, and then your group, your people will need to collect it on the Tuesday and then return it so I can charge it all up again, ready for the Monday. And then again on the Monday, people of week 12 will collect it all from uni, we'll return it all back, we'll put it all on charge, and then you guys have to work it all out. So I'll work out with the ladies downstairs to make sure that you can sign things out and so on. All right. And Lee has asked that all the lesson plans get emailed to her by the end of the week, so that way she will know what's going on. All right, she'll be able to do a quick review with you, but I think she's sending you a personal email about that one as well. All right. Now, finally, some more reading if you are interested. The AITSL site has quite a lot of information about this idea of the teach, improve, practice, reflect on practice. There's quite a few different documents and so on. So spend a little bit of time if you wish to develop any more of that. But otherwise, no tutorials this week. And we will see you either at uni for week 11 or at the school for Lee's group. So thanks everyone, and I will talk to you some other time.